Good morning. This is the 27th of June, 2012. I'm Dr. Jack Herlin, a volunteer and docent at the Palm Springs Air Museum in Southern California. Part of our mission is to record and preserve the history of our country's military conflicts, especially World War II. As part of the Veterans History Project of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., we conduct interviews of veterans and civilians who participated in those conflicts. Today, I'm at location at the Covenant Village of Colorado in Westminster, Colorado. I am very pleased and honored to be able to interview Staff Sergeant Einar B. Anderson. Staff Sergeant Anderson was a remote central fire control gunner and mechanic in B-29 bombers of the 20th Air Force flying out of Guam and Saipan into and over Japan during the latter part of World War II. So we're going to talk to him about this and several other areas of interest, and it is a pleasure and a privilege, my friend, to have you join us today and tell about your experiences. We're looking forward to it.
Pleased to meet you, Jack.
Let's move this over a little bit. Can I bring you over a little bit here, sir? That'd be good. Thank you. I'll bring you into a little focus here if you just a moment, and then I'll go get going. Staff Sergeant Anderson, would you please spell and pronounce your name, full name?
Einar, E-I-N-A-R, B. Anderson, A-N-D-E-R-S-O-N.
And you were born in what year and where?
1920 in Northfield, Minnesota.
1920, let's see. How old does that make you today?
A little over 29.
29, okay. I think you're a little backwards on that, my friend. My math calls it 92 years old, but you do look a little like 29. And you were in B-29, so how good can it get? Well, good. You were born in Northfield, Minnesota, and your mother and father were there. What did your father do? What was his name?
My father's name was Endry B. Anderson, and he had just been hired as the organizer for the athletic program for St. Olaf College in Northfield. They had not had an intercollegiate activity in Minnesota, and so he was hired to set it up. And when he moved to Northfield, that is when I was born. That first year that he was on the staff faculty at St. Olaf.
So he was a teacher?
Sort of.
Sort of.
It was athletics.
Okay, and he was a coach?
He was the coach, but he was the only one, so he brought in other coaches.
I'm going to turn off this fan for just a moment, excuse me. And by the way, I wanted to mention that there is some cold water in that little red bag at your feet in the event that you'd like to take a break. But getting back then to Northfield, where did he come from?
Well, my father, Endry, grew up in a little town in western Minnesota called Cottonwood in Lyon County. He was born in a log cabin out there in Yellow Medicine County. I grew up in Cottonwood, and the girl he wanted to marry was in the grade ahead of him, and that was Rebecca Lendy, my mother.
Mm.
But she wouldn't have anything to do with him until they got out of school. He kept after her, but she finally was a teacher also in Albert Lea, Minnesota, and the two got together and got married in 1917.
And they were born all here?
Oh yes, yeah.
Oh, and what your background is for your father?
Well, my father's father was Anton E. Anderson. He was born in Wisconsin from the immigrant parents that came from Norway.
All right, where in Norway were they? Do you know?
What's that?
Where in Norway?
Well, that was in Sungstead. Sungdal, I guess it was, in Norway.
All right, I'll take your word for that. And your mother was, did she come from immigrant parents as well?
Yes, my mother was born in Minnesota, but her parents came also from southern Norway,
Oh,
Rogaland area.
okay. And her maiden name was?
Lende, Lende.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have?
My folks had 3 boys. The first one they named after the mother's maiden name, Lende.
Okay.
The second one, a year and a half later, named after Anton, my dad's father. And I was born, I was the baby, the last one. I was born 1 year, same birthday as Anton.
Is that right?
1 year later. And so they named me Einar, E-I-N-A-R, in order to get the initials that my dad had,
I see.
E.B. Anderson.
Very, very interesting. And were you born on a farm? Did your father
No,
do any side?
we were born in town. We were living on a house that they bought that was on the St. Olaf property. There were the big woods here.
St. Olaf being the
St. Olaf College.
college.
They happened to have a spot in there with a house that he bought.
What was
And
the
that's-
address of the house? Do you remember?
No, it was on Forest Avenue,
Forest, all right.
right on the edge of town.
Does it still exist?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it was a regular city neighborhood?
Yes, a very small town, of course.
Yes.
There are 2 colleges in Northfield. Each one at the time had about 2,500
Oh,
students.
really? Oh.
Carleton College on the
Right.
east side of town and St. Olaf on the west side, each one with 2,500 students. So they had a total of 5,000 students
Oh, my.
during the school year, and the city itself was only 5,000.
Is that right?
So you can imagine how heavily populated in students it was during the school year.
Absolutely. What did you do as a boy? What kind of fun did you have? What kind of games did you play?
Well, we happened to live, we got into mischief most of the time.
Do you have any very good examples?
Well, one story we sometimes tell, this particular house we lived in for 10 years, was on the side of a hill, because St. Olaf is on a hill, so this was on the side of a hill, and behind the house was a little barn, but it was up above the house. And on the uphill side, it was only 1 story. But on the downhill side, it was about 2.5 or 3 stories, so
Right.
it was higher. And my dad evidently had some workman or something was gonna work on the roof, and the guy left the ladder up against the eave on the uphill side. And there was nobody around, and we were preschool, so I was probably about 3 or 4 years old, and then Anton was about 4 or 5, and the other one hadn't quite started school yet. So the 3 of us climbed this ladder up onto the roof, and then there were cleats on the roof, boards.
Mm-hmm.
We got up there, straddled that gable roof like a horse, and inched our way across towards the front, towards the high end.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a cupola there, so we'd have to stand up, but we could grab a hold of the louvers.
Right.
We got around the cupola, got back on there and up to the front till we got right to the peak. And then we called to my mother, "Mother, come see where we are." Well, she finally came out, saw us up there and she put her hands up like that, you know, stop, stay there, don't move, stay there. Well, right away we could tell things weren't quite right. So we backed out of there, led by me, of course, because now I'm the first. Get on that moving around. We were able to get down from there before she had anybody after us.
Who was the leader of that? Was that the older brother?
Oh yeah,
Always.
oh yeah.
Did you play any sports when you were kids?
Well,
Did they have any empty lots or places for you
no,
to?
we didn't. My dad saw to it that we were not mixed in with the rest of the kids in town, so we get some of our best friends to come on up to play with us.
I see.
After leaving coaching, my dad did not. He liked coaching, he liked athletics, but he also was a hunter, fisher, deer hunting, and that stuff interfered terribly with his
Teaching.
yeah, they overlap. So he couldn't wait to get out of that teaching job, and when the Depression hit in 1929, he was able to get some wealthy Norwegian to loan him money, and he bought a farm on the edge of town and built a baby chick hatchery.
Oh.
So, but during that time then, I had become 10 years old, so my teen years were out there at that hatchery. And the fun that we had at the hatchery was amazing, because we had hundreds of thousands of hatching eggs, and they're not all going to hatch. So we'd have to candle them and separate them before they were hatched. So we'd have 55-gallon drums of what we called rotten eggs.
Mm-hmm.
So we would have those out in back of the barn, and we would have rotten egg fights. We'd throw these at each other, and we had our buddies come from town to have a real sport. And one of my best friends was, and ushered our wedding later.
What was his name?
Warren Grunert. He was a track star. We both went out for track and stuff like that. I was a pole vaulter, he was a hurdler.
Okay.
But he came out to play one time, and my brother threw a rotten egg at him, but it was pretty wild. Gonna really miss him. But he was gonna be cagey, and he ran a few steps and then turned real fast, ran this way and then looked back, see how he's doing. Timing was perfect. The egg went right up into his helmet. It was in February, so it's cold. But that egg went right up, oh boy. But my dad never bothered us. Never stopped us from doing some of that stuff. Terrible, it's amazing.
Was your mother the disciplinarian?
No, there was no, oh, my dad was a disciplinarian, but he knew the difference between harmless fun and bank robbing, see, for example. So,
What was the name of the grammar school that you attended?
the what?
Grammar school.
Well, there were two grammar schools in Northfield. Longfellow on the west end of town, and Washington on the east end. I went to Longfellow for 2 years. Then in the third grade, we'd moved out to this hatchery, so now I was at Washington. So I actually went through third through sixth at Washington. And I had only one high school, so we all wound up at the same junior high and high.
And the name of the high school?
Northfield High School.
Northfield. Is that still in existence?
Oh,
I
yeah.
suspect it is.
Of course, they have a new school now.
Sure, sure.
And
Were
their
you-
colors were orange and black, and I won, each of my brothers and I won letters.
Oh, all right, I was gonna get there. What sports did you play there?
I just went out for track. It's at high school, just track. That's all.
And,
But at St. Olaf, I went out for cross country.
all right, well, what about, let me stick with high school for a minute. What was your favorite subject in high school?
Well, I tended to lean very heavily towards science. And math was a nuisance, but get involved with it when you're dealing with science.
Did you have a favorite teacher?
Well, I don't think so. We had a lot of really good teachers. The only episode that sticks out in my mind, when I was in junior high, my dad had picked up a newsprint Valentine, you know, it folds up into an 8.5 by 11, and had a picture of an old maid teacher, you know, with a bun up on top, and it said, "Some folks go to college, others go to school just to see a teacher act just like a fool. If knowledge were great riches, then you are poor indeed, and words of but one syllable are just about your speed." Well, I thought that was pretty slick, and my dad says, "Any one of you boys want to give these to one of your teachers?" And I said, "I will." So I took it and tried to use a little discretion. The particular teacher that I gave it to was the one that had the cloakroom for the boys. So I looked around, didn't see her anywhere, so I left it on her desk and got the heck out of there. A couple hours later in the study room, I was called out in the hall. For some reason, that teacher nailed that on me. And of course, I could never tell a lie. I was like George Washington there. I was stuck with that. So anyway, I got sent to the superintendent, and he had an awful time not trying to laugh while he was trying to correct me. But anyway, after I got out of high school, the same teacher, we crossed paths at church, and she'd come up to me right away. "You remember that nice card you gave me?" She was mad as a wet hen at the time, but subsequently she was okay.
That's funny. That's funny. Now, when you worked, the family job, I suspect, was at the hatchery. So whatever work you were doing in high school?
Well, what we did at the hatchery as teenagers, my dad brought in an expert at chick sexing that separates the pullets from the cockerels, and we had a school. This fellow taught us all how to do it. So my two brothers and I, plus about 20 others that we recruit, we're going around sexing chicks at all these different hatcheries in Minnesota. So that paid pretty well. It was a penny per chick. And we could do as many as 800 an hour.
Oh my goodness.
So during the Depression, we were able to make ridiculous money. So we were working our way through St. Olaf, paying our own, but at those days, it really didn't cost much for those college. Everything was cheap.
Are you going to give us the secret of sexing chicks?
What's that?
Are you going to give us the secret?
Well,
How to?
there's really no secret. It's a matter of dexterity. You have to turn the chick upside down and roll its anus inside out. You roll it back on your thumbs so that you can tell the folds, and that seems to be how the Japanese figured out how to separate the males and females.
So that worked.
Well, it works. That's right. Nobody's 100%.
What did you do with the males, the cockerels?
Well, that's sad. They are worthless. So if the chicks, if baby chicks are worth, say, one price, let me say $100 for a box of them, and you separate them, so now you only have 50 of each. So you sell the 50 pullets for the $100, and the cockerels are worthless. You really have a heck of a time selling them because they don't give eggs, and they're too small to eat, so it's bad. But that's why chicken is so cheap in the market, because the only chickens that are of any real value are the hens because of the eggs. But we were feeding those chicks to the hogs and everything else. It was terrible. you gotta do something with them.
Did you have a girlfriend in high school?
Nah, I had different girlfriends, but they didn't.
They didn't pan out?
Oh, no, I was too busy. I didn't monkey around with that.
Did you get good grades?
No, that's unfortunate. I had so many diverse interests that I got myself involved in everything I could imagine. So I did not get,
Such as what? What were some of the extracurricular things that you did?
well, it was mainly track and so forth. We had, because we were on a farm, I gathered in a horse and buggy combination of leftover stuff farmers had, put together, and I'd take kids from school out for buggy rides, stuff like that, and in the wintertime, sleigh rides, and all of it was, you might say, junk from a previous year. I would go get some farmer that had something out in back of the barn, and I'd haul it home and fix it and get it working. And so I did a lot of stuff like that.
Who had the horse too?
We did. My dad would occasionally get different things from different farmers because this was during the Depression, and they couldn't always pay him cash. So sometimes he got this pony from somebody, and he got a pair of goats from somebody else, and so we had fun with that combination.
Did your mother have a garden at home then at the same time?
Well, no, she didn't. My dad did. He had us boys plant a humongous garden just to keep us busy.
Growing what?
Vegetables. Rhubarb, I remember one time we had about half a dozen rhubarb somebody had planted, somebody had planted for us. And I dug them up, doubled the holes and put a fish in each one. We had a river in town there, and we would go fish for bullheads and stuff. So I would drop a fish in each one of those holes and put half of the rhubarb in there until pretty soon I had a whole lot of rhubarb. But it worked like fine.
Is that right? What kind of religious upbringing did you have in the home?
Well, we were raised as Lutherans and never deviated from it. And many of these, the tie with St. Olaf was such that many of the pastors that developed over the next decades had been students at St. Olaf. And so we knew many of them, of course. And I've never gotten in trouble with any of them, but so we were active and devout Christians.
All right, and when you finished high school, what year was that? About 1938?
That's it, 1938. You're very good, Jack.
And tell me, had you been aware of some of the European and Asian conflicts in those days?
Well, of course, Germany was starting to make trouble all over Europe. And when I started at St. Olaf, I took 2 years of German from a German teacher, Bollenbacher. And it occurred to me, I wonder about sometimes the news was coming in about the way Germany was acting, and Hitler especially giving all those talks, sort of like Obama today, real strong and yelling and screaming, and I thought, boy, nobody's going to buy that kind of stuff. But they did, obviously.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the reasons they were so successful is if you didn't agree with them, you disappeared. All they did is they make you disappear.
And the Japanese and China, were you aware of that?
We were aware of them, but I wasn't paying much attention. And then when they hit Pearl Harbor, by the time Pearl Harbor struck, I had already been 2 years to college. And
Okay. Go ahead.
I had been 2 years to St. Olaf and got very, very poor grades. As a matter of fact, I probably didn't even complete some of that because I was too busy working to pay my way, and track, gymnastics, stuff like that, and occasionally dating with gals. And then I had all these subjects I was taking, and nobody advised me. So I went, it was like a smorgasbord. I went in there and I took chemistry, physics, mathematics, German, piano, religion, English, biology. I don't know, it's just terrible. I had way more on my plate than I was able to handle. It didn't bother me any because I kept busy. And after 2 years I decided, well, I will go out to Stanford with my oldest brother. He had just graduated from St. Olaf and he was going to go to graduate school.
Did both of your brothers go to St. Olaf preceding you?
Oh yeah. They graduated, but I did not. I went 2 years and I got sidetracked. But by the time I left St. Olaf, I was already engaged to Rena,
And Rena is,
my wife.
and her name, Rena.
Ruston,
And where did you meet her?
at St. Olaf. She was a music
In
major.
your, how did you meet? Tell me the story of how you met.
Well, Rena's mother's brother, they were more or less from Chicago, I think. But they had, she had a brother that was a piano and organ professor at St. Olaf College. I wouldn't have known that because I wasn't aware of her or her family, but I knew about this professor and admired him. And I had taken several years of piano from a different professor, a woman friend of my mother's that was a professor also. And so when I went up to St. Olaf, decided, among other things, I would also take a year of piano from this professor, which I did. And so I got well acquainted with him, was down at his house a few times, and lo and behold, when Rena came the second year, I was a sophomore now, and she came as a freshman, as a music major, just to get with her uncle. So I turned around and started to date her when I could, because she had everybody was after her, needless to say. And anyway, it didn't take very long, and I would drive down to Wisconsin, to where she came from, 200 miles. But that, as I look back on it, that was kind of crazy, because I would make trips down there to see her. So when I went out to California in 1940, we...
You and your brother came out.
Yeah,
How did you get there?
we drove out.
With what kind of a car and whose car?
Oh, I guess it was probably my car. I had a Ford Coupe, I guess, 1940. And so we took him, got him hooked up to Stanford. They were very strict.
Your brother.
Yeah, Lindy.
And he got into Stanford. What was his major there?
MBA. He got a master's in business administration.
And you enrolled at Stanford at the time?
I did, he
You
did.
did not.
And I just went ahead and was going to kill time till I go back for chick sexing back home.
Okay.
So I got a job at a gas station and so forth. But I wound up making friends, of course, with guys my age. Got started, got a job with a gold dredger manufacturing company, great big company that made these things all over the world. That was kind of fascinating. Anything mechanical and structural like that kind of turned me on.
Mm-hmm.
So I did get a job as a crane operator inside a structural shop of a gold dredger company, the Yuba Gold Dredger. But I wasn't really interested in making that a career.
Where was that? Palo Alto?
No, I was in Benicia, California.
Oh, okay.
Benicia, in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But I naturally left there and went back home. And so I went back and was involved in this chick sexing again. But
When did that take place? I mean, what time of the year?
the chick sexing is always in the spring. January, February, March, in that area.
Did
Cold.
you have to quit your job then to go back for that?
Oh, yeah. But I wasn't serious about that job anyway. But when I went back, I guess it was then that I got engaged to Rena. But she didn't go back to St. Olaf, nor did I.
Mm.
So it's kind of crazy. Well, during the time that I was out in Vallejo, California, where the shipyard was, I wasn't on the shipyard, but I was kind of envious. I wanted to be able to get on there and see those ships, you know, and get on them. So the young fellows about my age, I guess, we took a civil service examination that the Navy put on to try to select apprentices. So again, I wasn't serious, but I went and took these tests. So when I got back to Minnesota for that chick second here, I get a great big envelope with an offer of a job as an apprentice. And I thought, man, that might be kind of interesting. So I went back out and hired on as a sheet metal apprentice in July
And what year was that?
1941.
Okay.
So that in December, when Pearl Harbor hit, we were told, don't quit, you're on a federal job, you know.
Yes.
So I stayed with it for about 3 years and graduated as a journeyman.
Where were you when you heard about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Well, Rena's brother had come out, her kid brother had come out there, and he and I were down in Berkeley, California, just walking down Telegraph Avenue, when we see these papers, you know, said extra, extra, extra. So it was probably 7 o'clock in the morning, I don't know, very early in the morning, why we were down there so early. I suppose we'd gone to church down there to one of our Norwegian Lutheran churches.
And what was the mood then of the family and your friends?
Well, it wasn't very real, you know, it's hard to...
Did you know where Pearl Harbor was?
Oh, yeah, sure. No, we didn't, it's just like everything else in Europe, it was falling apart, you know. We weren't really as close to it as if you were there, but in fact, there were Japanese ships coming into San Francisco Bay to get oil, right up to almost to this Pearl Harbor. Obviously, when Pearl Harbor hit, all that stopped.
Yeah.
In fact, I believe that the government stopped shipping oil to Japan probably a month or two before. That may have provoked them into doing this because they couldn't. 85% of all their war material came from us, the Allies, between Britain and the United States. 85%. If you shut that off, Japan was through. But they didn't expect that ever to happen.
No.
Because by this time they had battleships and aircraft carriers. They had a huge, they'd been building stuff up. We've been selling them scrap iron and everything.
Exactly.
So they had built up a lot of stuff, but when they actually took on Pearl Harbor, that tipped the thing over.
When you went back there to get that job as an apprentice welder,
Not a welder, sheet metal worker.
sheet metal worker,
That's cutting and forming,
and what company was that with?
it was the Navy.
So it was a Navy project.
It was a Mare Island Naval Shipyard.
So,
And the Navy had probably a dozen shipyards all over the country, see.
how long did you work there?
Well, actually, I've worked different times, see. Altogether, 25 years.
Oh my! How about before you got into the military? By the way, there's another question. Where did you see your first airplane?
Well, that would be out at the hatchery, because these barnstormers would come and land in the field right out by our house. And naturally, kids would all run out there. We were teenagers, we'd run out there and try to get a ride, you know. It didn't amount to a lot, but they were the barnstormers.
Where did you take your first ride?
Probably out there at the hatchery, because they'd land out there in the hayfield, you know.
And what did you think?
Well, to me it was interesting, but that's about it. I'd be interested primarily in the function. How does it happen? How does this thing work?
Okay.
Whereas my brother, Anton, we called him Tony, he was intrigued by flying. He wanted to fly. As fast as he got out of St. Olaf, he went into the Navy as a Navy pilot. And he flew a complete deployment in Southern Pacific, South Pacific, and was finally killed.
Oh my.
Because you can't dabble around with some of this stuff and be always free. I wound up being drafted into the Army Air Corps and wound up on a B-29 and flying over Japan, but I was, the Lord was with me, I never even got a scratch.
But you must have stayed at that job before you were drafted. And you weren't drafted until, that job protected you from the draft, actually.
That's right, I was exempt from the draft as long as I was a student.
Oh.
As soon as I got out of the apprenticeship, I got immediately reclassified to 1A, and I had to go down to San Francisco, 49 4th Street, take my examination and so forth, and boy, they got me in right away.
What year was that? And the date, do you have any idea?
Well, that was probably
43?
late 43 or 40, early 44.
Okay. And you went in as a...
Well, because I had all of this naval training, civilian training, when I went for the reception center, the physical center, and they asked questions and so forth, I remember we were in a single file after all the exam, and down a hallway, and here was a big Navy chief with hash marks on his arms and everything. And it was real slow, because he'd ask a few questions and so forth. So I walked around, stood behind him. I thought, there's no big hurry here, so I walked around, stood behind him, and he would ask what branch they wanted to serve in and so forth, and no matter what they said, he took merthiolate, didn't have any felt tip pen, and he'd write a big A across this guy's documents, paperwork. So every one of them were going into the Army. So I looked around and thought, well, he can't be putting them all in the Army. So I looked around, and here were a bunch of guys sitting that had already gone through, sitting over here. So I went over and sat down with them to find out what they were talking about. And I could see that they were all going into the Navy. So I thought, well, what the heck? I can either go in the Navy right here, or do I want to go in the Navy? And I decided, no, I wouldn't want to go in the Navy because they would put me in the Seabees for sure because of my training. So I'd rather be a radio operator or a pilot or something. So I went back and got in line, and when I got to this chief, and he asked me what I wanted, I said, put me in the Army. So he put a great big A on there, no problem.
And so you where'd you go from there?
Well, I was still out in California, so I had to go proceed to sell my house, get packed up, take Rena and the baby back to...
Well, wait a minute, when did you get married? Did you get married before you
Oh, yeah.
were drafted out? Well,
We were married in 42.
Let's go back and see when you got married and where.
Well, shortly after Pearl Harbor, within 6 months after Pearl Harbor, I realize I'm gonna be stuck there indefinitely. The whole picture has changed and I am engaged, so I sent a telegram to Rena to set the date. The only thing goofy about it was that it was only about a 2 week. I could only get a couple of weeks off from my job. So they quickly put together a wedding dress and all this and threw together the wedding and everything, and I drove back there and we were married
Where?
in her dad's church. He was a pastor. So it was a country church in Wisconsin, Elroy, Wisconsin. So we were married there, and then immediately on the wedding day, we stuffed whatever we had into this Ford coupe and headed for California.
Did her father marry you?
Yeah.
His name?
His name was Andrew Rustin,
And he was a Lutheran pastor, was he?
Lutheran pastor. He was an immigrant, so he had a nice, thick, rolling Norwegian accent, which was kind of enjoyable.
Surely. And you were used to it?
What's that?
You were used to it?
Oh, yeah. But Rena had never been out west. She had never been even to Minnesota before she came up to St. Louis.
How old was Rena when she was married?
21,
And you were?
22. I just turned 22. My birthday was on the 4th and we were married on the 18th.
Uh-huh.
But as we got further west, there were fewer trees. Trees started to disappear. And as you can imagine, when you get out into Kansas and Nebraska and so forth, as we pulled into Cheyenne, Wyoming, she wondered what did she get herself into, because this was a western town like in the movies, wooden sidewalks, you know, I mean, it's crazy. And we drove on to Laramie, Wyoming and stayed for the night. And that's when we first started running into what are now called motels, but in that day it was called auto courts.
Mm-hmm.
And we stopped at this auto cart called the Lazy U Motel. 50 cents a night. Oh. But things improved as we get out towards California, of course.
And where did you find a spot to live when you got to California?
Well, purely by coincidence, I suppose, there was a family that grew up in the same town as my dad and mother, so they were very close. And during the Depression, my dad got him some work right there on our hatchery, converting this farm into a hatchery. So he was kind of the foreman. Well, he had now lived out in California, out in Vallejo. So my dad just called him and says, pick out a house for Einar and Rena. So he did. My dad paid the $600 down payment. And the house was $4,600, brand new. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
So we paid $23 or $24 a month on the mortgage. So that's where we lived for a couple of years.
Did she work at all out there?
Well, she got a job with the Bank of America as a clerk, you know, bookkeeper, till she had a baby, and then she dropped out.
And when did the baby come?
Well, January 3rd, 1944.
And the name? And boy or girl?
Oh, there's a boy, just 3 boys, and that was Endry, named after sort of my dad, Endry B. Anderson.
Now I've got a picture that you brought here, and I'm going to take a look and see if I can bring the picture down to where we can get a better view of what you look like at that age. Now where was this taken? The picture?
Which one? This one?
Right down there, yes.
Well, that would be here here in Denver because I was going to school at Lowry at the time.
Okay.
I can only tell that because I was a corporal,
Uh-huh.
and I was only a corporal for a few months while I was a student at Lowry.
That's a pretty good picture of you and Rena. Was that before your child was born?
No,
That was,
he was born before I got into the service.
okay. Well then, let's go on back to where you were working, and how long did that last? As far as,
Well, when I got sent to Denver for basic training in Buckley Field, I sent for Rena and the baby to come on out, and the baby was only about 6 months old, so he wasn't even walking yet, you know.
and tell me, where did you live in Denver?
Well, I lived with the Army barracks, but we got her a rooming house, which would be okay.
Did she work there at all?
No, not yet. No, she was busy enough with the baby. And of course, we had made a few friends, Army friends. But,
What kind of basic training did you have there?
well, that was at Buckley Field out here. And it was, I guess you'd say, classic shrunk down training because it was only about 6 weeks, I don't know, it wasn't very long.
Was that with the Air Force or the Army?
Well, with the Army, Army
It
Air
was the
Corps.
Army Air Corps.
Yeah.
Okay. And how long were you there, did you say? 4 weeks, 6 weeks?
Something like that, 6 weeks.
What,
And then,
the training, was this military training? Was
yeah,
this mechanical?
yeah, but then they are just kind of sorting you out as to what to do with you. And I got good enough scores, so I wound up going to this Central Fire Control School in Lowry, which was the most advanced electronic program the Army had
That was here in Denver, at Lowry.
at Lowry Field in Denver.
And this was in 1943?
1944.
Okay.
So we had electronic training, electrical and all this kind of stuff for that system called the follow-up system. It had all these different things that had to work in order to point those guns, remote control turrets. Really amazing.
Was that by simulation that you had it, or did you actually have any aircraft with that?
Well, not in Lowry we did, it was all bookwork, you know.
Were computers involved at all
Oh yeah,
at that time?
not to us, but there were computers in the system that would control them. So actually, we didn't get into the B-29 system already till we got to MacDill Field in Florida.
Where did you take your first flight while in service?
Oh,
Remember?
I believe it was Fort Myers at gunnery school. We went out every day at gunnery school, but it was only to show us how they're doing it in Europe. In other words, you hold these machine guns, you know, like this, shake all over the place, terrible. And it made me sick to think of those poor suckers in Europe on B-17s and B-24s, you know, it's terrible.
Yeah.
It's almost a generation ago, starting to become obsolete. Whereas the B-29 was so advanced, our gunnery stations were cameras. We would point a camera. And the turret was 40 feet away.
What were the, when did you get in, when did you get and join the B-29 groups?
At MacDill,
Okay, in Florida.
Florida.
And how did you get to form them? How did you go into groups? Did you go into crews?
Well, first of all, we reported to Drew Field in Tampa in order to get put together as a crew.
I see.
The 11 guys would be put together. Once you're a crew, that's when we first meet each other.
Sure.
Then they took us down to the waterfront. It was kind of interesting. Took us in a river boat, you know, with a paddle wheel. Took us down here with fanfare, and we got down to MacDill, and there was a band playing and everything. Like, really amazing
Is that right?
that they're trying to instill
Yeah.
patriotism and so forth.
Sure.
So we're treated very special from then on. And so now we were scheduled to fly in B-29s,
And you were how old then?
24.
And your skipper of the plane, do you remember his name?
Yeah, John Warren,
From where?
Iowa.
Mm-hmm. And how old was he?
I really don't know, but I think that they were, most of them, about my age, because I was 24, and a lot of these guys coming in would be way back around 19 or 20.
Yes, yes.
I was already, because I had been deferred, I was already a little older than some of these guys.
Tell me a little bit about the B-29. How many turrets did it have and where were they?
Well, there are 4 turrets and a tail mount. They don't call the tail mount a turret because it doesn't turn 360. It only does a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But the turrets, there are 2 on top and 2 on the bottom. And they all had 2 machine guns, except one, the one on the top, aft, had 4, it's hard to imagine, but 4 machine guns in one turret. That's
Shooting 50 caliber machine?
That's right. And these Japanese Zero didn't stand a chance. They couldn't even get close. We'd mow them down just like they're cutting grass. Terrible. So by the time I got out there, I never saw a Zero.
Is that right?
All they had left was flak, anti-aircraft flak they'd throw up, you know.
Well, then central control was where in the aircraft? Midships?
Well, yeah, my position was midships, that's right. There was a blister on the top, and that's where I would sit so I could swing 360 degrees around. See?
And you and the whole turret swung?
What's that?
The whole turret, and including you, were revolved?
No, you're not in a turret. You're in an observation place on a swivel chair, and you're here with a camera, and that's all you have to do. And you aim point blank at a target. The turret would be anywhere from 20 to 40 feet away from you,
I see.
and it would be aimed by the computer for ballistics, temperature, airspeed, all that stuff, corrected for everything so that it sends that bullet right to that target. It's just absolutely awesome.
What was the rate of fire from those guns, do you remember?
Well, they're all about the same on a caliber 50. It was about 800, 750 to 800 rounds per minute.
Good grief.
But if you've got 4 machine guns firing,
Yeah. Now, was your control, where you were sitting, did you have control of all the turrets?
no, every gunner has a primary gun and a secondary gun only. So that if you're firing your turret and nobody else is firing, your secondary turret will also point at the target.
Oh.
But any gunner that actuates his turret, he'll get his and not the secondary. See what I mean? Pretty cleverly done.
And when you're head of the control, how do you have the three or four people under you then?
No, actually, what we do, the central fire control, we were a command gunner only in operating that system. So when you take off with a plane, your gunnery system is not on. You wait till you get to a particular area somewhere where the pilot calls and says, calls me and says, activate the guns.
Okay.
So then I tell these guys to activate one at a time. If you turn them all on at the same time, it blow all the fuses.
Mm.
So they would one at a time, would turn it on, and he's done, and the next guy, and then the next guy, and so forth. Till you got them all turned on.
And so you had 2 on top, 2 on the bottom,
That's right,
and the tail gunner.
that's right.
Nothing in the front?
No, because the nose gunner is the bombardier, an officer.
Does he have a gun? Does he have weapons up
He's
there?
got the same as everybody else. One of those turrets on forward, upper or lower forward turrets is his.
But he's not sitting there.
No. The turrets are separate from,
Yeah. Yeah.
sort of like on a battleship. You don't have these
No,
great
sure.
big
Right.
guns here and then some
Yeah.
guy sitting there. He's sitting up in a director's station, see? And he's aiming, and then the big guns will turn. That's the way it was on the B-29.
Yeah. And you had, the crew was, how many men and officers?
What's that?
How many men and officers?
Well, there
on
were
your
11.
crew? 11 total.
There were 5 officers and 6 enlisted men.
And the officers included the pilot, the co-pilot, the navigator.
Bombardier and what they called the Mickey operator, the radar operator.
Okay.
I was trying to think of the 5th one.
The radio
Pilot.
operator.
No. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, and the Mickey, the radar operator.
Let's take a quick look and see if I can get a picture of your crew. When was this taken?
Probably in 44 or 45 sometime.
And can you pick yourself out there?
Can I what?
Can you point yourself, pick yourself
Well,
out?
yeah, I'm kind of standing almost by myself, second one from the left.
And who was where's your skipper?
The skipper, they usually put them in order. So this skipper would be this guy here, and then the co-pilot would be there. This would be the engineer, and then the central fire control,
Okay.
and then on down.
And you were with that group for how long?
Well, probably a year.
Do you ever hear from any of them now?
No, that's kind of goofy. Everybody's faded into the background.
Did you have reunions early on?
Well, no, but when we were actually in service, we would go out on picnics and stuff.
Sure.
We'd get a truck and load up. And those of us that had our wives out there, so we'd have some of that.
Did you have your wife there?
Oh, yeah.
And
Not out in overseas, but down at MacDill.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Well, then how long were you at MacDill? Let's catch up there.
Oh, probably 6 months.
And from there you went,
From MacDill, we went to Saipan, bingity.
all right, let me ask you, how did you get to Saipan?
They flew us. They wanted us there as quick as possible.
Did they fly you, were you there to fly in your own planes there, or were you
No, we just flew.
Commercial?
We flew in a
military?
military transport.
Okay.
They couldn't waste the bombers.
And your crew was all together in that?
Yeah,
You stayed together? And,
yeah, they took us as a crew.
all right, when you got there then, how did you get your aircraft?
You don't get an aircraft per se. You're merely, it's like getting on a school bus. You're told, all right, you're gonna report to the flight line, and you get on a plane.
And that plane is used by different crews?
That's right. There was no special thing, with the exception of that A-bomb, Wwii, that was a special plane. They didn't, on Tinian, they didn't let anybody else fly it, but all the others were. But,
Were there much differences between the,
what's that?
were there many differences, any differences at all between the aircraft?
No, between the planes, no, they're all the same.
You felt
But
comfortable
you know,
no
an
matter?
interesting thing, I thought, training at Lowry Field, one of the things they trained us is we would go to the theater in the morning, among other types of training, we'd all wind up in this theater till the theater was full of all these guys. We weren't crew yet, we were just being trained for that. And they'd show us lots of bloody movies, guts, nothing, terrible. And usually there'd be 2 or 3 people would faint, guys would faint, because it was so awful. But they're trying to inure you, because when you fly to Japan and back, that's a long, long time. You're gonna be up in that airplane 16 hours or 12 hours, you're not gonna get back like they do in Europe.
So it was that long of flights from where you took off
That's right,
in Guam or
didn't matter.
Saipan?
Saipan or Guam, about the same distance. But anyway, we had these battle videos that were very descriptive to try to get you so you wouldn't faint when you see it.
Custom.
So when we hit Saipan, and now we're right there where these planes are landing and all this kind of stuff, and we're talking hundreds of planes, you can imagine what it might look like. See, this is the thing, wasn't it? So anyway, we were told, as this replacement crew we were, that we wouldn't be going on a mission for 2 weeks, because we have to see some more of these movies. But they said, but nevertheless, read the operations board every day. So I read the operations board that same night when I got there, and here's my name up there on a flight. So I showed up for the flight. Heck, it was one of these sort of a leftover thing when they've got pilots left over. I mean, airmen, combat crews left over in a pool with no crew or plane because it's what's left over.
They needed a replacement to full.
Yeah, and so they put together a bunch of these guys into a crew, and they put me in there as a waist gunner on it, even though I was a central fire control. They had a guy for that, so they put this thing together. And it was kind of tongue-in-cheek because we weren't a real crew, but we were made up of components, you know. Every one of us had our right duty except me, which was a waist gunner. But about 200 miles from Japan, one of our engines had to be turned off, feathered. So here we are on 3 engines in our group we're with. Usually you have a group of about 20 planes. They went on without us. So here we had this 3-engine plane as we approached Japan. And the pilot was an airplane commander this was his first flight as an airplane commander. He wasn't going to drop those demolition bombs anywhere. So we went there and went on to the initial point and straightened out. And he dropped the bombs on a marshalling yard. As soon as we did that, he was going to head home. But he couldn't get the bomb bay doors closed. So here we are on 3 engines and the bomb bay doors are shaking. And he turned around like this, you know, and headed for Iwo Jima. So we landed in Iwo Jima.
That was your first flight?
That was my
flight?
That was my first flight. It wasn't even with my crew. So it was nice to look back on because otherwise you wouldn't stop at Iwo Jima unless you're in trouble.
Yeah. See, what amazes me is I wasn't aware of such a long flight. In other words, how long did it take for you to take off from Saipan or Guam before you got over Japan?
Well, it's probably about anywhere from 6 to 8 hours
Really?
just getting there.
What were you doing, what were you all doing in that interim up there? You were flying in formation, I take it?
Yeah, you're just shooting the breeze and so forth and eating, because we would have hot meals with a sort of a camp-like thing that you pull a tray out and eat. So we would have to eat our meals on the plane. And the radio operator was our medic.
Oh, was he?
So if anybody needed medical service, it was our radio operator that would do that. But fortunately, we didn't have that problem, because by that time, there really weren't any more Jap harassment.
Yeah. And over the target, you were about how long? How long did it take you to drop
We
those
just fly
bombs?
over and out of there.
And then another 7, 8 hours back.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Did you lose many planes?
Well, I don't really know. I think we always used to say that we lost more B-29s to Curtiss-Wright, the engine manufacturer, than we did to the Japanese. Because we were having engine trouble quite frequently.
Is that right? And how many planes ditched?
I don't know that. They did a few.
Did you have practice for that, if and when?
No. There was no elaborate training for that. Because the B-29 was pressurized like an airliner, and we could fly at 35,000 feet. So,
Did you have fighter escort?
no.
Hmm.
We normally didn't have fighter aircraft because they couldn't get there. They would have to, it was quite a process trying to get any fighter planes to Japan. They got them, but they would have a B-29 as a mothership, and then these others would follow, because the B-29s had navigators. We could navigate anywhere, whereas the fighter planes can't.
Yeah.
They get out there in the ocean, they know where they are.
When you made your bomb run, what was your elevation?
Usually it's 17,000 feet.
Any reason for that?
Yeah, because you couldn't hit the broadside of a barn from altitude. That Norden bomb sight was way overrated. You couldn't hit anything with it. It was supposed to help you hit the target, but actually they got pretty good at 17,000 feet. They got so they could pretty well hit the targets.
And what about anti-aircraft fire?
Well, that's how they get the flak up there. They were shooting that stuff up there.
Did you have much of it?
Well, yeah, they always had a lot of that, but they, you can't dodge it, you know, you have to just fly. And we had a lot of chunks of material about this square, with like fish hooks in there that are like, or fish scales, you know. It was supposed to be bulletproof, so we would wearing a thing like a baseball umpire, and then all these things we'd lay around so that anything that came through would stop before it hit us.
What was your most harrowing experience on a B-29?
Well, it's almost as shameful. We would occasionally, from time to time, in training, when the engine would leak oil or something like that, we would be out on a training mission. That would be at in the States, and we couldn't go, so the pilot would land again. And the operations people didn't like that, but the pilot decides whether or not to continue or to land. So one time we had landed at night, and here come the operations people and pickup trucks and their lights all aimed at the plane. And I had gotten out to check the lock system so that the plane wouldn't, you know, landing gear wouldn't collapse or anything like that. And I checked all that and so forth, while everybody else was up front. But I made it a practice that any time I was walking around that plane, I would stay away from the circle of the propeller. You know what I mean?
Sure.
In other words, there's,
Absolutely.
even if it's not turning, if it's not turning, it's still, you got that dangerous spot. So I would never walk through there. So I had done what I was gonna do, and I came up alongside this fuselage, walking towards the front. But the number 2 propeller was turning, so you couldn't see it at all. The lights were on you like this. So I came walking through there like that, and that guy just about fainted, the operations guy. Reached out, grabbed me, pulled me back. And I looked back and I thought, oh my gosh, that looks terrible. Because there wasn't a whole lot of space. The propeller's coming like this.
Sure. Scary.
Normally you wouldn't see that, but I was careful, careful to never take any chances like that.
You wore parachutes.
Yeah, we wore 2 parachutes usually. We had a main chute, then we had a little one that we fastened onto here, on our chest. Just in case one doesn't open up, the other one should. But in our crew, we never had any jump out.
How often would you go on a run? In other words, you go one and you'd be gone 18 hours?
No, it's usually about once a week, I guess.
Once a week. So there were enough planes so that they could get flights going every day, I suspect.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure of that.
But you only had it like once a week.
Something like that, you know.
Mhm.
We played a lot of pinochle.
Did you get good at it?
Well, it gets so damn boring, we would start to play a double deck. When you play a double deck, everybody's getting good hands.
Did you make any money?
Oh no, we never played for money.
And where did you live? Barracks?
Yeah, Quonset
Or
hut.
Quonsets? And you lived with as a crew?
Well, yeah, the enlisted men in one Quonset hut and the officers in another. They wouldn't put us in the same Quonset hut.
About how many flights did you make, combat flights did you make over Japan?
Well, as luck would have it, I got this screwball flight without even my crew. It was the only time, really, that I had a flight in which we dropped bombs. That was, and it wasn't aborted, but it was not over the target. It was just as I explained. So, in the meantime, the A-bombs started to drop, and so we didn't continue bombing. There was a 1 bomb raid after the A-bombs because the Japs were slow about surrendering.
Mm-hmm.
So Curtis LeMay, the general in charge, decided he was going to try to have 1,000 B-29s go on all in the same day, August 26th or something. And he couldn't get 1,000 B-29s because there's a lot of them under repair and so on. He got about 800, I guess, and then he had a bunch of fighter planes and Navy planes that went, so they got over 1,000 planes, but only about 800 B-29s. Anyway, when that was cut off, stopped, now we had to bring supplies of clothing and food and radios and stuff to the prisoners of war camps around Japan.
I see, so this was after the bomb was dropped, the
Yeah,
2 bombs were
This
dropped.
was after their surrender.
Where were you when they bombed in Hiroshima and
And on
Nagasaki?
Saipan, on Saipan.
Did you hear about it then?
Oh, of course, yeah.
You were not aware of the bomb itself prior?
No, we didn't, that's right, we didn't know about it other than the fact that it was an atomic bomb and that was one plane was able to wipe out a whole city. So everybody knew about that. And that was not something you wanted to have secret. It was secret until it happened.
Yeah,
And then they wanted it
sure.
broadcast all over the world. Well, so after that and before it got a formal accommodation to these prisoners, because our government wanted, our military wanted to get these
People
poor
back.
guys that were
Sure.
in prison camps all
Right.
over they weren't treated like Sunday school, you know, so we had these B-29s, they painted a PW under the wing,
Oh.
so that when they fly over, you could see it says PW, prisoner of war.
Mhm.
And we would load the bomb bays with food,
Oh, I see.
clothing, great big pallets with 55-gallon drums that had been steam cleaned, and clothing and food and stuff, and no guns, no munitions. But we would fly these things in to the prisoner of war camps. It was very difficult to find these prisoner of war camps because the Japanese maps weren't the same as what we would have.
Mhm.
But we would find them, and then we would fly down to 300 feet, slow down as much as we can, and drop these pallets,
300 feet?
yeah,
Oh, my goodness.
and as slow as we could go. And if this is the space of the prisoner of war camp, we would try to drop it right here because it would slide like this, you know. You couldn't keep it. We had to be going about 140 miles an hour, I guess. So when you drop them, those cargo chutes didn't make it hit the ground any softer, but it was to try to keep them, slow it down.
But the noise must have been terrible underneath that.
Well, I don't know. We're inside this
Yeah, I know.
pressurized compartment.
But can you imagine a B-29 coming over you at 300 feet?
Well, those guys would usually get up on top of the barracks to be damn sure they weren't out there when this thing's gonna drop. They knew what was gonna happen. So we would drop these. We did a lot of those. But much of the time, our pilots, co-pilot and navigator had to guess at where these prisoner of war camps were because you couldn't really pinpoint them very well. And you would have this Mount Fujiyama with ridges that would come out like star-shaped, you know. So we would fly a B-29 in there. We tended to be climbing all the time a little bit, but you had to be pretty careful. You would fly right into the mountains, you see.
Yeah.
So we'd turn, and then we have many times turned with it just about 90 degrees. Like, it's hard to imagine how you're going to stay airborne when you're this way.
Yeah.
But if you've got some
Yeah.
velocity, that'll help keep you up. But we had occasionally people wanted to go on these missions to just to look and to see, you know.
Mhm.
So we might have 2 or 3 sailors or other people
Mhm.
flying with us on these prisoner of war missions.
And how long did you do that?
Oh, I suppose probably a couple of months.
When did you finally get orders to leave?
Well, those of us like myself who were not there very long, we were there sent as a replacement, we couldn't leave. When it was all over, you had points.
And you didn't have the points?
Well, you had a number of points
Sure.
to qualify
Yeah.
to go back to the States. And some of us, like myself, we didn't have enough points.
Yeah.
And this 73rd bomb wing that I was in was the original first bomb wing. It was in China, Burma, India
Really?
in the first place. And it had been moved to Saipan before Tinian and Guam. Well, Curtis LeMay's headquarters was in Guam. So he he didn't come up to these other places, but they were directing all of this. So, so after a couple of months, the 73rd Bomb Wing was disbanded completely, obliterated. And those of us that were not qualified to go back to the States, we got sent to Guam. So I was actually on Guam for a few months, making a few of these prisoner of war missions out of Guam. We didn't load up on Guam. We would fly up to the southern part of Japan
Oh, I see.
and land, and then a bunch of these Japs would load things up into the plane and we'd fly from there. But eventually, of course, we came home. But now when we came home, they put us on a troop ship. They flew us over, and when they brought us back, we got on a troop ship, which was all right. But,
At least you're going home.
that's right.
When you were over there, did you get much mail? Could
Yeah,
you get
we-
mail through
Yeah,
pretty well?
we would get mail from time to time, yeah.
How about medical and dental facilities? Were they adequate in Saipan?
Well,
For the
so
crew?
we didn't have any as far as I was concerned. I was in good enough health so that I never had anything on Saipan. I had it in the States. They're trying to get you all fixed up so
sure.
that you were,
Yeah.
so that you wouldn't need that. So
Did they have religious services available for you?
over here they did, but
Over there?
not over there.
Not over there. No chaplains?
Well, it's all business over there,
Yeah.
man, alive. We were all ready for the next
Jump.
flight, you know.
Yeah.
One interesting thing I thought, there was probably maybe a dozen different enlisted crew in one Quonset hut. So many on one side, so many on the other. Now, there was one crew right up by the front door on the one side, and the airplane commander's name was Fate. I suppose F-A-T-E, I don't know. Captain Fate. And whenever we would be playing pinochle and stuff like that, and any officer that came into our Quonset, we paid no attention to him, you know. He could walk up to the crew and talk to us and so forth. They would never sit down with us, but they could talk to us. But when any Captain Fate's officers stepped in the door, they would yell, "Attention!" click their heels, and their crew would jump up and stand to attention. It was ridiculous. We considered it was ridiculous. I was the only one that did that. And so evidently this Captain Fate was right by the letter of the law, you know, bingity bang bang, you did this just like that. Well, when they were breaking up the 73rd Bomb Wing, they were going to send their planes back to the States. So here his plane, this Captain Fate's plane, and we knew these guys, we were sitting shooting the breeze with them all the time. So they were all going to go back to the States. And I said, well, gee whiz, I'd sure like to swap places with one of you guys. I was ready to go. And they said, I can't do that. So it turns out that when that plane was to leave, their crew, and then they were going to probably fill it up with half again more guys, you know, that were qualified to go back.
This is on a B-29 now?
Yeah, they were going to fly a B-29 back to the States,
Got it.
and his crew of 11, plus maybe half a dozen other guys were going to be stuffed in there. All they were going to do is fly back.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have been just tickled to death to be one of them. Well, it just happens they were taking off about midnight. Something like that. And it was starting to rain and blow. But they were getting out of there, so they didn't worry about it. But about an hour later, their radio went out. And it's nighttime. So they were worried about, the pilot was worried about how he was gonna find his way to the next place, like Hawaii or Iwo Jima or whatever. So he decided to turn around and go back to the base, to Saipan, in order to get it straightened out. So he turned around and came back and attempted to land, but the wind was blowing something awful, it was storming, and he crashed, killed the whole bunch. His entire plane load was gone.
Out in Saipan?
On Saipan. So we had, at the flagpole, there was a ceremony with about 24 bodies in caskets, you know, oh gosh, bomb cases, you know.
Horrendous, yeah.
Can you imagine what that kind of an impressive thing that was? And that, but for the grace of God, could have been me if I,
Sure.
oh boy.
Yeah.
But Captain Fate, what a combination.
Yeah. What is-
Sometimes you wonder if there was a predestination there.
Yeah. Terrible. Well, where did you land when you came back?
Well, it must have been San Francisco Airport or something like that. And I can't recall now whether I went by train to, but I was going to be mustered out of the Army at Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, which was as close as I could get to where Rena was living, in Wisconsin.
Where was she living, by the way? Was she living with the
With her
parents?
folks in Elroy.
Got it.
And so I knew that that's where I wanted to go to get, you know.
And you had one child at that time?
Yeah. Skip. We called him Skippy, but now he goes by Skip. And he lives out here in Arvada, and he's 68 years old. Can you imagine? And he's retired.
What kind of work did Skip do?
Huh?
What kind of work did Skip do?
Well, actually, for about 17 or 18 years, he was the manager of the Santa Fe Railroad depot or freight facility here in Denver, which was a good paying job. But he had, out of college, he had gone into the Air Corps and was trained as an aircraft maintenance officer, so he became a captain. But he didn't want to stay in the service, so he got out and he ran this Santa Fe deal. But then their headquarters is in Chicago, and so one of the vice presidents had a son that he wanted to have a good job, so he sent him out here to take over Skip's job. So Skip was to train him, and then they cut him loose.
When you got back then to Wisconsin, where did you decide to live?
Well, we hadn't really decided. We just gathered our stuff and went up to Northfield, where my folks were, and I lived there for a little bit. And my dad wanted to start my dad was kind of retired also, and he wanted to start an auto dealership. I don't know. But I didn't think it was too smart of me to couple up with my dad. He was just... So, I wrote a letter to Mare Island, to the head engineer in the design division. And I said, I understand that the population at the shipyard has dropped from 80,000 down to 10,000. So I realize you probably don't have jobs. I said, don't worry about it. I said, I'm merely writing to find out if you were expecting me or wanted to hear from me. I get a nice letter back from the head engineer. We are waiting for you. We got a particular job for you. We've been hoping to hear from you, blah, blah, blah. And then the last sentence says, you might be interested to know you had 3 raises while you were gone.
How nice.
So I went back there and man alive, they made me a naval architect engineer, and even though I never finished college and all that,
It's amazing.
but lest you think that that was nepotism or something, which it couldn't have been, I actually left Mare Island just because I just didn't want to make a career out of this thing. So I went to work for Lockheed Aircraft Company, hired with them in Minneapolis. And they wouldn't hire me as an engineer because I didn't have a degree. They wouldn't give me, I had no prior aircraft experience. So I really didn't have a whole lot, but they wanted me nevertheless because it kept bothering me. After I took an interview and turned them down, I was trying to hold out as an engineer. But they would call me every week or so, bingity bing, like that all summer. So finally I thought, oh, what the heck, I might as well do it. So we sold our house in Minneapolis, they moved us down to San Fernando Valley, went to work for Lockheed Aircraft, and actually I was with them about 15 years, became a senior design engineer, if you can imagine. Just because of the work I was doing, and I took company courses all over the place. So most of these people, they get college degrees and they do this, real expert, you know. Well, I became expert, but hands-on, you know.
Surely, surely. Something to be said for that.
Yeah, you got a lot of detail on these engineering courses and design and stuff, and you just don't have a natural fit necessarily, just because you are learn how to get scores, you know.
Sure. Now you had two more boys somewhere along the line.
Now I've got 2 boys and 3 girls.
All right, so tell me who was the next one that came along and when did he or she arrive?
Well, Skip was the first one before I got in the service, and as soon as I got out of the service, we had a daughter, Randy, R-A-N-D-I. And then another one, Becky Jo, and then finally the third one, Christy K.
3 girls in a row.
3 girls in a
Followed
row.
that.
And then we had another boy,
And his name?
Ross.
And where are they now?
Well, Ross is retired and he lives in Las Vegas because he has a wife who happens to be a brilliant banker. So she works probably a 6-digit salary for banks in Las Vegas. And if she doesn't like the bank, she quits and goes to another bank. I've never seen anything like it.
Is that right?
And she doesn't have a college degree.
Do they have children?
Yeah, they got a couple of kids. But Skip has 2 kids. Both of them graduated from UNC, Northern California.
Okay.
Both of them have their own job, have their own apartment, and everything, but they just aren't married.
And the other girl, the 2 other girls?
Well, Christy was married for 25 years, had 2 kids, but she died at age 46 from diabetes. She had it in number 1 from about age 15, 16. Went through all the problems. Finally got a kidney pancreas transplant, which did not last.
Sad.
But the other 2 girls, Becky lives in Phoenix, and her husband was a sailor for 8 years, I guess, on an aircraft carrier. But he became an expert on munitions, so that when he left the Navy, he stayed in the Naval Reserve, man alive. He would go around teaching courses to sailors on munitions. It was quite a great big subject and specialized. So he wound up with a job with a sort of a musician, a company. Spacecraft have a lot of explosive devices to do things you probably are aware of.
Mhm.
When they need something done, they actuate it with an explosive, bingo, like that. Sometimes they're not very big, but they're very sophisticated. And the company that makes those, when he left the Navy, he went to work for one of those. And there again, he doesn't have a college degree. He doesn't have all this paperwork, but he does have a firm
Sure.
understanding
Sure.
of munitions.
Yeah.
And as a result, he wound up with this company that I think Goodrich Tire and Rubber Company took over that work. So they do that. They make these things for these various spacecraft companies. But now he's retired from that. Mind you, lives in Phoenix, but he's constantly being called and so forth. It's just amazing. And then Randy, her husband, she has a couple of daughters, are fantastic girls. One in Sacramento and one up in Roseburg, Oregon. Each with 3 kids, just absolutely marvelous.
Oh, nice. How many grandchildren do you have then, sir?
Well, we have about 10 grandchildren and 11 or 12 great-grandchildren.
Oh, my. Well, that's...
And we've been married 70 years. That sounds old.
You celebrated 70 years this year.
Yeah.
Now, how long have you been living in
Covenant Village?
Covenant Village?
16 years.
And how did you get here? Why and how?
Well,
How did that happen?
going way back, my mother and dad, while we were still at home, were constantly saying this, you should go to a senior residence when you can. Don't wait until you're half dead. So when we would go around camping and stuff, they would take a look at these senior places in Duluth, Minnesota, and some of these cities. So in the back of my mind, we had this in mind, you know. So actually, probably 10 years before we came here, my dad had died, so my mother went to a Methodist home up in Des Moines, Washington. That's between Seattle and Tacoma, where the airport is. There's a little town of Des Moines. And the Methodist church has a great big compound, just like this one here. So my mother went there and lived there 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
We would run up there to visit 2-3 times a year.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of oriented to this type of program. But this place up there in Des Moines, Wesley Terrace, was a member of a national continuing care association. Come to find out, for all of these different ones all over the country, there's only a few of them, a few hundred of them, that are members of this association. And this Wesley Terrace was one of them. So Rena wrote to that association, says, give us a list of accredited places, which they did. And we decided to visit some, you know. So over a 10-year period, we were checking them out, and it just always seemed like this Covenant program, Covenant Village, or Covenant Retirement Communities, was where we wanted to go. So, but we didn't go and check them out necessarily. But if we were gonna go through that town, we might stay overnight, see, so we did that a couple of times. So they had us, Covenant Retirement Communities had our address, name, address, even though we were Lutheran. I didn't know what, we didn't know what Covenant was at all, that didn't mean anything to us. But anyway, we finally got a brochure from CRC that, about this Colorado, Covenant Village of Colorado. They hadn't built it yet, but they had the public relations stuff, you know.
Sure.
Very impressive. So we called Skip and said, "Where is that?" He says, "Well, that's about 2 miles from our house." Can you imagine?
Amazing.
So we came and took a look at it, and I thought, doggone, this thing is really built well. So we put in an application, and we obviously were having a little trouble selling our house, you can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Things were starting to already get bad. But we finally got a realtor to take it over. We came here without, our house hadn't even been sold yet, but we came here. And it finally sold, but it penalized me quite a bit for various reasons.
Sure.
But we got it, got through.
What kind of housing do you have here?
We're on the 6th floor of the tower, facing east, northeast. So we get the sun for a couple hours in the morning, and then we're in the shade.
And you got a nice view of the city?
You betcha. We got couple of miles worth of lights and all that kind of stuff.
What do you do here for activities? Are you involved?
Well, at first, Rena directed the choir, and I was the librarian for the choir, and I arranged the files and stuff, got the music all together. Some of the pastors, like Delmar, got a hold of a couple of boxes of choir music, but it was in boxes, you couldn't use them that way. So I went through, Rena and I went through and got them all lined up in file cabinets, got them all set. So that kept us busy for a few years.
Now, is she a choral, did she have training in
Oh, yes.
choruses?
Oh, she's very good. Then became president of the RAC for a couple of years. So we had a lot of business there to take care of.
RAC is?
Resident Advisory Council.
Okay.
And then after that, it was mainly playing golf and going out for aquasize in the pool. Right now, I swim 12 lengths of the pool 3 times a week.
Okay.
And I go for a walk. Now I go for a 1 mile walk, but I used to walk 3 miles every day for 5 days a week.
Mm-hmm.
I've tapered off on that. And I've had evidently a heart attack because I called 911, I didn't have a pain. I think this term, heart attack, is almost a misnomer because you tend to think that it's going to be painful. Well, I had just a little pressure on my chest and I thought, gee whiz. So I called 911, they came out, put a check EKG or something on me and got a readout and said, "Hey, you gotta go to the hospital right now." And boy, everything went real fast. I wound up there and they put in a stent, and now I'm on a lot of medication, but I'm just fine.
How long ago was that?
Huh?
How long ago was that?
Oh, year and a half ago. A year ago last May.
And you're still driving?
No. That is another problem. Both Rena and I have macular degeneration, so I can't read or write. What I look at is blank. I can see around, but I can't. Very, very frustrating. So, we seem to be doing pretty well on our blood tests, but and I can't complain, you know.
Surely.
But 92 is starting to sound a little old. Now we're gonna go back to Chicago in another week to celebrate Rena's brother's 96th
Is that right?
birthday.
Super.
Oh boy.
Super. What about your religious affiliation here? Do you have a particular church that you attend?
Yeah, we're members at Bethlehem Lutheran down here on Wadsworth, 2100 Wadsworth,
In Nevada?
in Lakewood.
Lakewood, I see.
And it's a Missouri Synod. Years ago, I would have never thought I would actually join a Missouri Synod. But the Missouri Synod is more like we feel it should be. Whereas the ELCA that we grew up in, my gosh, they accommodate homosexuality, women pastors, all this kind of stuff that we don't go for at all. So,
How about the fact that Covenant is so filled with many Swedish people? How do you Norwegians handle that?
well, that's just unavoidable. I'd like to say that actually Swedes are Norwegians, actually,
I see.
with their brains knocked out.
Oh, I see.
Now, Rena doesn't like me to say that.
Is she Swedish?
No,
Oh,
no, we're both Norwegian.
okay. Oh, well, that's
But until 1905, which is fairly recent, I
Yeah.
think, there wasn't any Norway.
no, Sweden.
All of Norway was part of Sweden, and it was that whole peninsula was Sweden.
Have you been over to the old
Oh
country?
yeah, we've been there a couple of times.
And you have relatives living there?
Yeah, but they're real shirt tail. You know,
You don't keep
several
it-
generations.
You don't keep in touch with them?
No. I think my dad's mother came over as an immigrant, as a teacher from Norway to Minnesota. And she was the teacher for all these brothers. But my granddad, my dad's dad, was the youngest of these brothers. And about the right age, and he married her. So there was a connection there,
Yeah.
so that he was writing back and forth.
Looking back on your experiences in life and in the military and in business and so forth, what advice would you give to these kids that are coming up, these young people that you see running around here, and your own children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren? What's important to know and to do as young people, and what pitfalls do you think are run into on the way?
Well, I obviously from my background and my life, I was particularly interested in certain things, and so I read that, I study that, I work on that, but not necessarily in the formal way that a college has, because they don't, in many cases, in my feeling, don't know what they're talking about half the time, and they're all book learning stuff. Whereas a kid can get a degree or not a degree, wouldn't make any difference, but he's got to get to working and at the very bottom. When I married Rena, I was an apprentice in an apprentice program, making $4.64 a day. Now, you would never think you should get married on something like that, but that's what we did.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, the house was $4,600, brand new house. So there are various things, but you have to be able to make yourself get up, go to work, no matter what it is, and step along. You can't do it from the couch. You're going to have to go on like that. And so I have done different jobs, but always have a lookout for a way to improve. And that does not necessarily mean you have to get a PhD or something like that. So,
You've always enjoyed music though, haven't you?
oh yes, yeah.
Why?
Well, I suppose it's because my parents were musical, and I can whistle, I can get the scale arrangement and so forth. The fact when you take piano lessons, music lessons, you get some kind of basics that help you regardless. You don't have to become a concert performer or anything like that.
That's right. Well, what about the military? Would you make any suggestions as to young people today, men and or women, as to having a military life?
Well, it seems like a military background is kind of desirable because you get bumped around in there and you can't be it's hard to be a prima donna when you're in a military environment. And there are some people who make themselves prima donnas, they don't realize what they're doing, and that's just too bad.
Yeah.
But if you're in a military environment and a routine number and you're in there, man alive, that does something. You don't have to make a career out of that necessarily either.
Yeah.
But to be out there and mixing in on various jobs and stuff, you can get a feel for what you should be doing.
Staff Sergeant Anderson, I want to thank you for coming and sitting with us and talking with us this afternoon or this morning. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and thank you for your service to your country and to all those guys who flew the B-29s.
Yes, sir.
You're an honor to them. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.